Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another edition of Let's Talk Fantasy Football. I'm your host tonight. My name is Nick Walsh, and I am here by myself again. I apologize for that, guys, and I apologize that we didn't get a full preview up this past week. It was basically my fault in terms of timing. So, again, we're doing what we can, I suppose, and we will be doing better this week because we do have the recap here. I'll be recapping week 12, and then tomorrow we will be recording the full preview for this week. It'll be Don and Vinny coming at you for that. So we're excited. We're excited to get back to a normal schedule, non-holiday week. The holidays kind of throw some things into flux, as I'm sure you guys know. But anyway, before we really get into this week 12 recap, I do want to give a quick shout out to BenchBoss. They are still the revolutionary app that allows you to play fantasy football live while watching the game on TV. Predict the plays, the result of the play, and literally play fantasy football. And you can sign up again for that beta now by going to letstalkfantasyfootball.com/benchboss. So we got the Week 12 preview coming at you. I am sitting here in my living room watching the Bucks play the Kings, drinking a wonderful beer, and we're ready to go after I sip this wonderful beer. All right, guys. So the news for this week, we'll start with my favorite team, the Oakland Raiders, and Michael Crabtree will be suspended just for one game. It was initially 2, and then it was reduced to 1 on appeal. So Crabtree and both Aqib Talib are both suspended for that one game. We'll get into this a little bit more with the waiver ads as we, talk about wide receivers and that sort of thing. But this does have an impact because the Raiders are playing the New York Giants this coming week, which they are a very bad team. And Derek Carr should realistically be able to throw the ball around a little bit during this. So keep that in mind as we're going forward. In terms of the Broncos, just in their matchup, keep in mind as well, Talib will not be there. So that's their number one outside corner. To my knowledge, Chris Harris will still be playing in the slot, though he did miss some of the game this past week. But the Broncos secondary did look vulnerable after Talib left that game. Even with Amari Cooper getting hurt, which we'll get to later, they were giving up some yardage, some big gains. So keep an eye on that. Eli Manning, the big news today, Eli Manning will not start this coming week at the Raiders, actually. And it's going to break a streak of 210 straight starts for him. So pretty crazy. He apparently is doing this said he did not want to do this. I haven't listened to his emotional interview that he gave in the locker room, but I know a lot of Giants fans who are very, very mad about this. The man who will start is Geno Smith. I've always been a Geno Smith apologist, so maybe don't listen to me too much, but I think you can stream Geno Smith this week. I'm probably going to do it just to try and prove a point in a couple leagues, but anyway, we'll move on from there. Jimmy Garoppolo, he's going to start at Chicago this week. CJ Beathard got hurt at the very end of this game this past week. Jimmy G came in and led one drive in the last minute and actually threw a touchdown. They looked great. It is garbage time and they were down. Who really cares that much? It did lower the point total for the Seahawks defense, which I played, but luckily that didn't matter too much in the long run. Jimmy G is coming in at Chicago. He's another guy who's just kind of immediately into streamer territory and see how it works out from there. And then the last piece of news of the day was that Darren McFadden retired. So not that this isn't particularly fantasy relevant because he wasn't really doing much in fantasy, but he is no longer playing. He seems to be done for. He always kind of holds an interesting place in my heart as a guy who came from the Raiders. But, it is what it is. They'll move on with the Alfred Morris and Rod Smith combination and see how that works. So with that news out of the way, let's run through the injuries, get you guys all the injury news that you need to know. And again, quickly, I'm going to take a sip of my beer because I want to beforehand. All right, cool. So we'll start with Matt Stafford. In that Thursday Thanksgiving game, he hurt his ankle. He did keep playing. He didn't look the same. He was limping. And Stafford's a guy who will do that. He will continue to play through injury. It's seeming like he's likely to play this week, but to me, that just downgrades the whole Lions offense, because a quarterback with an ankle injury, particularly someone like Stafford, who is known a little bit for his mobility and able to get around a little bit, it makes a huge difference in that offense. And, he can't drive off that ankle as much. It really just changes the whole thing. So I'm downgrading the whole Lions offense a little bit this week. I might bet against them. I haven't really made that decision yet. But yeah, I wouldn't be starting Stafford, certainly, and maybe that'll come bite you in the ass, but I think there are better starts out there. With the Raiders, I mentioned it before, Amari Cooper did get concussed in this game. This was after Crabtree got hurt and after he got a touchdown, after Amari Cooper got a touchdown, so that was nice. But Cooper is concussed. He is doubtful, I believe, or his status is in doubt for Week 13, which is going to lead to some waiver interest and probably some daily fantasy interest for some of the other Raiders wide receivers, which I'll get to in a little bit. Paxton Lynch looked absolutely awful, looked like one of the worst quarterbacks to ever play in an NFL game for a couple quarters. And then he hurt his ankle. So he is out 2 to 4 weeks, it seems like, at this point. And I would be very surprised if they start him again after that. When Trevor Siemian came in, he looked good. He scored 2 touchdowns. The offense looked good against that terrible Raiders defense. So to me, this is an upgrade for all the Broncos, particularly Emmanuel Sanders and Demaryius Thomas. Siemian's just purely a better quarterback for producing numbers than Paxton Lynch would be, and that's all we're really looking for here. Greg Olsen, having just come back from that surgery on his foot for his broken foot, he re-injured that same foot. The news out of Panthers camp is that there's a good chance he will play this coming week, but it makes it difficult to really trust him. The fact that he comes right back, re-injures it, misses half the game. Who knows really? If there's a good chance he's going to play, how much is he going to play? Is he going to be in for full snaps? Is he going to be a decoy? Are they going to keep him in blocking? There's a lot of questions that need to be asked, and I don't know. I mean, keep listening to the news the rest of the week, but I don't know that he's a guy you can comfortably start. Doug Martin, in what looked like was going to be his best game since his first game back against the Patriots, unfortunately did get concussed. There's no word yet whether he's going to play this week, but it's worth noting that the Bucs did use somewhat of a three-headed monster afterwards, with Jacquizz Rodgers getting the most carries, Peyton Barber getting the touchdown, and Charles Sims getting the most targets. So while I'll talk a little bit about the waivers that I think you should be looking at later on in this podcast, it's not really a favorable situation for anyone in that Bucs backfield, particularly now that Martin is down. And then sticking to running backs who have kind of produced but kind of not, we've got Damian Williams. He left with a shoulder injury. He's not expected to play this week against the Broncos. So unless the Dolphins make a move, Kenyon Drake is going to be this guy. And the Broncos D is a tough defense. They're a good defense. But a guy who's going to get all that volume is a must start, against any defense in the NFL. So, keep an eye out on any free agent moves or any moves that the Dolphins do make in that backfield. But right now, Kenyon Drake is looking like the guy there. Moving over to wide receivers, we have Mike Williams. He has a bone bruise. He is day-to-day. I don't think that matters too much for fantasy, other than maybe narrowing the target share for the Chargers. And then Juju Smith-Schuster may come back and play this week. It's looking like he's going to be pretty questionable, so we don't really know. But he's looking all right so far. And then in Tampa Bay, going back there, we do have Jameis, who looks like he may come back as well. Right now, there's no line out for that game, meaning it hasn't been determined whether he'll play for sure. But signs seem to point toward him playing. And then we'll move to one defensive injury, which I know we don't normally cover, but Desmond Trufant is in the concussion protocol in Atlanta. He is their number one cornerback. And it's also worth noting that Brian Poole hurt his back in this past game, and Robert Alford also missed some plays in pain on the sideline. So the whole Falcons secondary is currently banged up. It's unclear how that's going to play out, but that's going to play a big part in one of the major streamer recommendations for us coming up here this week. So let's get into some cool shit and some weak shit. In the cool shit, we've got Jamison Crowder. Crowder's a guy I gave up on early in the year, and I think that was warranted at the time just based on his usage and whatever else. And now I'm getting back on the Crowder train when it's too late to actually pay any dividends for me. But he has at least 8 targets and 72 yards in the past 4 weeks. That's at least 8 targets every single week, and I believe 3 of those were double-digit weeks. So this is a guy who is getting a ton of usage. He even got a touchdown this past week, which is not really how you would expect him to necessarily be used. But yeah, Jamison Crowder is looking like an every week start down the stretch. And if maybe you picked him up, maybe you had him and just held on to him at the bottom of your bench, whatever you did, he's going to pay off for you. It seems like going down this stretch run, because he's their guy with Jordan Reed out. And it doesn't look like Jordan Reed will be back either. And you know, with Terrell Pryor really underperforming and then being put on IR, Jamison Crowder's the dude. And you really got to pay attention to it. Sticking with wide receivers doing cool shit, Julio and Antonio Brown really, really went the fuck off. Obviously, Julio with the 250 yards. He's the only receiver to do that more than once, and he's done it 3 times, which is pretty crazy. And then Antonio Brown on Sunday night, really just proving that these guys, you know, they may have a down week here and there, particularly Julio, but Julio just went from wide receiver 15, I believe, to wide receiver 3 in 1 week. So he's a guy that, you know, sometimes he's going to burn you, but you got to trust him. And same with AB. They're really just every week kind of guys, and it's nice when they do give you this kind of performance. Next one here is near and dear to my heart. Alvin Kamara, the guy who has really saved my season in the League Awesome, you know, League Awesome's main league, our big money league with our friends back home. Alvin Kamara is unbelievable. 188 yards from scrimmage and 2 touchdowns this past week. And that's with Mark Ingram still getting the majority of the usage. So it's really wild how efficient he has been and just how good he's been with the ball in his hands. He's an every week start, obviously, and you know is going to be a guy who will win a lot of championships for people going forward. Joe Mixon finally got a breakout week. He's a guy that I loved going into the season, and he hasn't really shown it. He's gotten a lot of work, but he hasn't really put up that week that you look at and you say that's that week where he really broke out. And I mean, we'll see if it sticks. But against the Browns this past week, 114 yards and a touchdown on the ground, as well as 3 targets, 3 catches, and 51 yards in the air. Just a great week for Joe Mixon. He really, really was a boon for you if you did play him. The New England backfield now, this is an interesting one because it feels like it's constantly changing and you can never really be too sure of what's happening. But right now what seems to be happening is the touch share is shrinking. So a couple of weeks ago we came on and we talked about how no running back was getting more than 30% of the touches. This past week, 2 of them got 40% or more touches. Rex Burkhead and Dion Lewis, I'm sorry, not touches, 40% of the snaps is what I was referring to. So this past week, Rex Burkhead and Dion Lewis each got 15 or more touches. They each got in the end zone. Mike Gillislee was a healthy scratch, as he has been the past couple of weeks, and James White only got 4 touches in this game. So it's looking like as this season continues, the Patriots are really honing in on the 2 guys that they want to be using in this backfield, and it's Burkhead and Lewis. And if that's the case, these guys are both every week starts going forward. And then the last one in cool shit, we've kind of been mentioning it for the past couple of weeks or for a couple of weeks now, but Robbie Anderson just continues to produce. The guy is, you know, just a monster in terms of it. He gets the targets. He's getting deep passes. He's getting touchdowns. I think his touchdowns will regress a little bit at some point, but regression's a weird thing in football. It doesn't have to come right away. It's something that over time, sure, it's going to regress. He's not going to catch touchdowns at this rate for the rest of his career, but for the rest of this season, who the fuck knows? So keep Robbie Anderson in your lineups. If you're sitting him, you're probably hating yourself for it every week. So keep that. Keep him in, that wide receiver 2, that wide receiver 3 slot, and you should be good to go. And then some weak shade guys, and then we'll get into the waivers. So the first thing on the weak shade is the Chiefs in general. The Chiefs, after starting off looking like honestly the best team in the NFL for the first couple of weeks, it's been hard to trust anyone. Even my guy Travis Kelce hasn't really been putting up the weeks. Alex Smith is, hardly a start. I would say he's not a start at all. Tyreek Hill, Kareem Hunt's underperforming every single week. They're splitting him with Charkandrick West for some ungodly reason. So I don't really know what to think of it. I mean, I'm going to keep starting Kelce just because I don't really feel like I have much of a choice not to. What am I going to do? Sit the guy? So it's tough, but I guess you just kind of got to deal with it going forward and see where it takes you. 1 second, I'm going to take a sip of beer and then we'll be back to the weak shit. I know a couple of weeks ago I complained about the selection of it only being IPAs at the liquor stores and whatnot, and I'm drinking a really, really nice IPA right now. It's called Pliny the Elder. It's by Russian River Brewery, and I'm drinking it on purpose, and it's good as fuck. So I guess I'm a bit of a hypocrite, but anyway, back to the weak shit. The Philly backfield. This was a blowout win against the Bears, so keep that in mind, I guess. But we all kind of thought Jay Ajayi would slowly, maybe, but surely become the guy here, and that's just not been the case. LeGarrette Blount got 47% of the snaps, 15 carries, whereas Ajayi got 28% of the snaps, 5 carries, and 2 targets. And then Corey Clement hanging around with 4 carries, 1 target on 19% of the snaps. So this is a weird situation, and I don't really know what to do with it because, as I said, it was a blowout win. But the Eagles are great, and they might have some blowout wins going forward. That might just be a thing that's common for them. So it's difficult to predict whether or not this is really something that will continue or which guys you should be using. At this point, I don't know if I'm starting any of them unless I have to. And if I do have to, I mean, I guess Ajayi is the most well-rounded, but like in a game that you expect to be a blowout, it should be Blount. Yeah, I don't really even know how to predict Clement at all. And then the last bit of weak shit that we have here is Leonard Fournette. He was outsnapped by TJ Yeldon this past week, only in on 44% of snaps. He's really shown to be a guy who's touchdown dependent as the year's gone on. And in the beginning of the year, he was getting touchdowns every week. That hasn't been the case lately. That being said, he does get Indianapolis this week at home. They're a 9.5-point favorite. So this is theoretically a get back on track week for Leonard Fournette. And let's hope for the sake of his owners that is the case. All right, guys, we're going to take a quick break before I run through some waiver wire pickups to hear from our good friends over at Bench Boss. And we're back, guys. That was our pals over at Bench Boss. I'm going to run through a couple waiver pickups that you might want to think about this week and then get you guys on out of here so you can move on with your lives. I know it is a short one this week. And again, we do apologize for that. But keep an eye out for the previews coming up Thursday morning and Friday morning. We'll have part 1 and part 2 out. That's again with Vinny and Don, possibly the best combination of the two of us, or at least the most entertaining, if nothing else. Those guys are probably going to be pretty drunk and having a wonderful time. But anyway, let's start out with some quarterbacks. So I mentioned earlier that Atlanta's secondary is bang the fuck up. All 3 of them are not doing particularly well. Case Keenum comes to town this past week, and Case Keenum, if you're a little slow to the draw here, has been a great fantasy quarterback this year outside of a couple games earlier in the season. So, hurt Atlanta team, Case Keenum coming to town with Adam Thielen and Steph Diggs healthy. It feels like a no-brainer to me that Case Keenum will be a great start. I mentioned earlier that Jameis Winston is likely to play this week. So he's coming right back into a nice cushy matchup against Green Bay. And they are on the road against Green Bay, but we all know that Green Bay secondary is nothing special. And that's a matchup you should be able to exploit. The third one, and again, I know I'm going to sound crazy here, but Geno Smith at Oakland, man. Oakland's the worst defense in the league this year. And Trevor Siemian came in the fourth quarter this past week and immediately just got 2 touchdowns. So I know Geno Smith is not a good quarterback, and I know the Giants aren't a good team, but I can certainly see a couple scenarios where Geno Smith ends up with 15 to 22 points in fantasy this weekend, and that's all you really need out of a streamer. So again, I think I'm going to do it at some point, just kind of to be a dick and prove a point, which I do a little bit too much in fantasy, but that's one of my weaknesses, I suppose. Moving on to running back, the number one guy is Rex Burkhead if he's available. I mean, I doubt he is unless people really aren't paying attention. But moving on from that, you've got Mike Davis coming back from injury for the Seahawks, so he will likely push Rawls and Lacey down the depth chart. And then J.D. McKissick actually had a pretty decent week this past week. Nothing crazy, but he's startable if you're in a pinch. And then we talked about the Atlanta backfield. Jacquizz Rodgers is the best one out of those, particularly against the Green Bay defense. He's the guy to pick up. You can't expect a crazy game out of him. I'll say that. You're looking at a pretty low ceiling, I would think. But Jacquizz Rodgers, out of those 3 guys, is the guy to pick up. So moving on to wide receiver, there's quite a bit. I will say Corey Coleman, I think he's probably owned in your league, but Corey Coleman got 8 targets again. He's going to break a huge one of these weeks. Josh Doxson, he's not really getting the targets, but he is a red zone target for this team. So he did catch a touchdown late in the game. That's where he makes his hay. He's a low floor option, but he certainly has some upside. And then moving on to the Jaguars, you have my guy Dede Westbrook, who is extremely talented, I think. And, it was a weird week because Patrick Peterson was covering Marquise Lee, who normally eats a lot of those targets. Dede Westbrook played 70% of the snaps this past week and led the team in targets with 10 of them. So, I don't think he'll get 10 targets next week, but 6, 7, yeah, sure. And with a guy this talented, with that much speed, 6 or 7 targets can get you where you need to go in fantasy. So I like Dede Westbrook as certainly a pickup and maybe a start if you need to. Zay Jones, another guy who got 10 targets this past week. He only caught 3 of them, but one of them was a touchdown. And he hasn't looked particularly good. I'll say that. But again, 10 targets, double-digit targets. That's a guy who needs to be owned. Close to that, Dontrell Inman. He had 9 this past week against Philly. And he's clearly been the guy who's getting targeted in that Chicago offense since he's been active. So Dontrell Inman's obviously the number one guy there. He should be owned in all leagues. And then this last one is, Cuz Crabtree is going to be out with the suspension because Cooper is doubtful this week. You've got Seth Roberts stepping into the number one receiver role, and then some combination of Johnny Holton and Cordarrelle Patterson playing the other receiver spots. So, Seth Roberts is the number one guy to target there, but I honestly think any of those guys are viable plays this week because Giants defense you're going up against, and the Giants defense is terrible. And then Holton and Patterson are both guys who can break big plays at any moment. Holton's more of, run down the field and you toss him a 50-yard bomb, whereas Cordarrelle Patterson is catch the ball, at the line of scrimmage and then take it 50 yards. But I think these are both guys who have huge play potential. And if you're in a bit of a bind, they're both reasonable starts against a Giants defense that just hasn't been able to stop anyone this year. So let's move to the tight end position. I'm not going to lie, I'm bone dry this week on this. I really don't have a lot of good ideas. Charles Clay had 4 targets this past week. I guess you can go to him if you want to. O.J. Howard with the returning Jameis. It seems like he's taking the role from Cameron Brate, which is fine. I guess that's a play you could go to. And then the one that we need to mention, even though I really don't think it's a good pickup or play, is Ricky Seals-Jones, because he's had touchdowns the past 2 weeks. I'll give you a little insight into the where this is coming from, though. 2 weeks ago, when he had those 2 touchdowns, I believe it was, he had 3 targets, so he wasn't really getting targeted too much. And then this past week, I first looked at the stats and I was like, Ricky Seals-Jones had 6 targets and he got a touchdown. Like, that's a guy you can look at. But then you look at the snap percentage. This guy was the 3rd most played tight end on the Cardinals. You have Jermaine Gresham and Troy Nicholas both getting more snaps. Ricky Seals-Jones was in on 17 snaps. He had 6 targets on those 17 snaps, and he got, I believe, 2 catches. One of them was a touchdown. So, I mean, obviously they're looking for him when he's on the field, and I guess Gabbert seems to like him. So you know what? Maybe you could do worse rolling the dice. Maybe you were trusting Greg Olsen this past week. I don't know. You're in a bind. You try for Ricky Seals-Jones. Like, it's not the worst thing. Tight end's a fucking shit show. We say it every week, but it's not something you can trust. I know that much. And I don't think he's like a league-winning tight end for you. So I don't know. It's very difficult to say. And tight end as a whole on the waiver wire, I don't think there's much there this week. So hopefully you're not really looking too far. That's why I was saying in the leagues that I have Kelce, what am I going to do? Pick up Ricky Seals-Jones and play him over Travis Kelce? Like, no fucking way. So do what you want there, but that's my take on the situation, guys. As I said, we have the preview coming at you Thursday and Friday morning. Make sure you are subscribing, downloading, liking, reviewing, and make sure you're sending us your questions, guys. We answer these questions all week. We have a text thread where Shrek sends them to all of us, and we all weigh in, and then he sends those answers on back to you guys. So send us your questions throughout the week. We will get to them either on the podcast, either via email, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, however you're getting them to us. We'll answer them. And, for Let's Talk Fantasy Football, this has been a solo cast with Walsh. Enjoy the preview the next 2 days. Later, podcast.